Well, welcome everyone. I'm subbing today for Kit Leggett, I hope she's well. I want to welcome everyone today and thanks for coming in on the rain. Before we get to our program, I have a few announcements from Ian. But starting out, please, we all know about our phones. If we would just make sure that they're silent so we don't have any interruptions to the presentation. And I want to say welcome to our HAS members who are watching from home today via Zoom. Lastly, as we approach a new month, we're very happy to invite you to our next monthly program hosted next Tuesday, March the 7th at 9:30 at the Jack Miller Center for Musical Arts. We're very happy to welcome Ron Bogle, brother of HAS member Gary Bogle, who is the president and CEO of National Design Alliance. It's a not-for-profit organization focused on supporting cities and schools through change and transformation. His presentation is entitled Reimaging America's Schools, Designing for the 21st Century. As usual, we'll have our cookies and coffee and conversation beginning at 9 a.m. and the presentation will be at 9:30. So that should be a really good program. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Richard Ray. Thank you so much for coming. Dr. Ray is professor of kinesiology and provost emeritus at Hope College. He also serves as the co-director of Hope College and Western Theological Seminary Prison Education Program. Dr. Ray holds a baccalaureate degree from the University of Michigan and an MA and a Doctor of Education from Western Michigan University. So again, thank you so much for coming. This should be a very interesting presentation, certainly a different focus on education, but a good one.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Is the microphone projecting adequately to everyone? Okay, good. It's very nice to be here today. I was in the prison, Muskegon Correctional Facility this morning, and honestly, I'm just glad to make it back. It was like Noah's Ark. I saw Noah's Ark float by as I was driving back, and it was quite a wild and woolly day. Well, it's really great. I think this might be my second or third time talking with HASP members about various subjects over the years. And it's always such a pleasure to be invited back to this august and learned group. I want to say something at the beginning that may sound a bit provocative. It's intended to. The things that you think you may know about prisons are largely true. So if I was to ask you to come up with a word or two that, comes to mind when I say the word prison, what would you come up with? Inhumane. Dangerous. They can be very noisy and chaotic. Yes. Okay, that's right. There are certain people who are in charge and certain people who aren't, for sure. Say more about that, Steve.
Many times prisoners are exploited by other prisoners. Many times prisoners are exploited by other prisoners.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah, there's power dynamics of many different kinds happening inside the prison. So
I think it's also sad that and they're there, and sometimes it's like a helplessness too. I wonder.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a lot of hollowed out people inside a prison. But most of the things that you think you might know about prisoners might not be right on the money. They might be very wrong indeed. What do you think you know about prisoners? What words would you use? And don't hold back. This is the time for us to share here. Angry. And what would they be angry about?
their situation,
Mhm.
rightfully or wrongfully.
They've been deprived of their liberty, and that's
Just
something,
angry was the word.
right, good. Mary has suggested that depressed is a word that might describe a person who's incarcerated. I certainly know plenty of incarcerated people who struggle with, depression. Absolutely. Good. Those are good words. Yes, ma'am. They feel a victim. I'm going to repeat the words now so we don't have to pass the mic. So it was suggested that a person who's incarcerated is a kind of victim. Is that what you meant to suggest? There's victims involved both ways, right? They were involved in crimes that produced a victim. And these men, they're mostly men, are also kind of the victim of a system that has put them in this prison, this criminal justice system that's been very, very hard for them.
Worthless.
Okay, well, worthless is a word that, to suggest a kind of lack of productivity or giving back to a community or a society or maybe even a family is a word that I heard suggested. Yes, ma'am. Hopeless. Some prisoners have aspects of hopelessness. There's a pretty high rate of suicide in prisons, and that's the sort of natural conclusion or natural result, perhaps, of a kind of lived hopelessness over a long period of time. Some of them are frightened. They are in contact with their peers. Peers is kind of a fancy word to mean others who happen to be in your own physical space, and it can be frightening because there's a lot of violence in prisons. Yeah. Okay. So these are the words that I've heard you. There's one more suggestion. Yeah.
I just wanted to add education.
What would you like to say about that, Suzanne?
Perhaps their lack of it or direction of the education that they've taken, whether it's from peers, family, environment.
Yeah, good. We're going to get to who's in prison in just a minute, and you'll find that one of the things that characterizes people who are incarcerated is a very, very low level of educational attainment. Yeah. I want to start with the idea, the Hope Western Prison Education Program is premised on the idea that every single one of our students in the prison is a child of God made in his image and likeness. That's where we start. If we couldn't start there, if we couldn't use that as the very foundation for doing this work, everything else would not hold together very well. But if we start there, if we start with the idea that all of these people at some point in their lives was loved, was cared for, was cherished, came from something, was made for something, then our work would be difficult to do, be difficult to carry on. It would be a series of disappointing and less than satisfying encounters. But if we start at that point, then everything is possible. So what I want to do today is just talk to you a little bit about the Hope Western Prison Education Program, the kind of problems it and other programs like it are meant to address. And at some point, I want to introduce you to some of our students. And then I want to take your questions and find out what you're thinking as you hear these things. And, listen, this is a group that doesn't have to wait till the end to ask their questions, right? So I don't think you will anyway. So I'm just saying you have full permission to just jump in whenever you want to jump in. Okay, so there are a lot of problems with the criminal justice system in our country, many, many problems. And the system of incarceration, the United States of America incarcerates more people per capita than any other nation on the face of the earth. And it's also the case that we incarcerate people for longer sentences than any other place on the face of the earth. And Michigan is among the states that has the longest sentences. And so in some ways, the Michigan experience, the Michigan example is one that is of particular concern for our entire country. The people that are in prison are by and large people from minority groups. They're mostly Black and brown people. Our program has 24 students in it. 19 of them are African American. The people who are in prison are by and large uneducated. Most of our students stop their formal education somewhere in junior high school or the very early part of high school. Since that time, they've earned at least a GED while they were in prison. We have a few guys that have a high school diploma and one guy that has a little bit of college. But for the most part, people who go into prison are uneducated. And then, of course, people who are in prison are poor. They go into prison poor, they get poorer, if you can imagine, while they're in prison. Even if they have some resources when they go into prison, those are stripped away from them. And then they come out with nothing. And we wonder by the recidivism rate, the rate at which people are released from prison who eventually commit new crimes or break rules and then have to go back to prison. We wonder why it's so high. I mean, it's amazing it's not higher, actually. That's the amazing thing. Not that it's high, but that it's not higher, given these things. So prisons are also very expensive. Now, all of us have contributed to our communities and to our workplaces and to our families by earning money over the years. And some of that money we sent off to the state of Michigan in the form of our taxes. And 20% of that money that we've sent off to the state of Michigan went directly to corrections. That's to say nothing of the indirect money that goes to corrections and criminal justice more widely. 20% of the state's general fund is for corrections. That is a $2 billion a year tax bill to the state of Michigan. I want you to keep this in mind, because even if you don't particularly resonate with the gospel imperatives to visit the prisoner, and even if you don't, think that social justice has a place for our conversation in West Michigan here, I think you hopefully will be attracted by the good public policy that's involved in paying fewer taxes to the state of Michigan to support prisons, because it's a terrific waste. There are about 31,000 people in our state's prisons, to say nothing of county jails or a couple of federal prisons sprinkled here and there. There are about 26 or 7 state prisons in the state. Only one of them is for women. And so, most of the people who are in prison right now are male. Says there's every woman in here is not surprised by this, Jim. Sorry, but they all understand completely why this is. So this is also something. It costs about between $36,000 and $40,000 a year to warehouse. That's essentially what's happening. I wish I could give you a better word. Warehouse people in prisons. 95% of people who go to prison will eventually be released. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. It's our correction system doesn't really correct very much. I mean, lots of people get out of prison and they end up going back. They have very few resources. Everybody has heard this saying, paying your debt to society. This is a familiar phrase to you. You've paid your debt to society. You've committed a crime and you've been incarcerated. You've paid your debt to society and you're released, and now your debt is paid. And it's bright skies and clear sailing and open horizons, when in fact, it is trap after trap after trap after trap. And the likelihood that you will eventually fall into one of those traps and go back to prison is very, very high. So we've got big time problems with our prison system, big time. If you are an African-American male in your 30s, 1 in 10 of you is in prison on any given day. Pam, what were you doing in your 30s? What was happening in your life in your 30s? You were working. What were you doing?
When I was 30s, I was working over there in a General Electric company at 16th and US 31 as an engineer.
Right, and they made hermetically sealed motors over there, right?
Yes, they
That's
did.
where my father-in-law worked too. Yeah. So a lot of us in our 30s are building our careers. We're having our families, they're starting to, children are, marriages and children and so forth. We're buying homes. We're putting equity into our homes. We're becoming involved in various ways in our community. That's what we're doing in our 30s. We're really being sort of set up to kind of launch our families and their futures outward, but not these guys. These guys are in prison or in jail. And that statistic that 1 in every 10 Black men in his 30s is in prison or jail on any given day ought to offend us. We ought to take that as a marker of a fundamental brokenness in our society that we need to run at as fast as we can. But that's the sad truth. Oh, much fewer. Yeah, Hispanics are about 30% of that, and white people are 10% of it, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, if you say 1 out of 10 are Black,
Yeah.
where does the white come in?
Yeah, they might be
100?
10 to 20% of this total number, and Hispanics are 30 to 40%. I mean, when I walk across the yard at Muskegon Correctional Facility, I'm looking at Black and brown faces the whole way. The whole way. So I think sometimes we get the idea that people who commit crimes, and by the way, I'm not a sociologist or a criminologist or a social worker or anything like that. I have no professional training. But, I think my perspective, I'll just say that, my perspective about people who commit crimes or, and they end up, going to court, going to prison, is they got something some wiring's gone wrong. There's something miswired in these people. Maybe they were born that way. Maybe they've got a gene that isn't producing the right proteins or something. Something's off with this person. But I'll tell you, as I've worked with incarcerated people over the course of the last 4 years or so, I've started to realize that these people have led very challenging lives indeed. And I want to play this short video for you so that you can get some idea of what I'm talking about.
It's time now, everyone. gonna do the compassion trauma circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
There is no shame. There is no shame. There is no shame.
I'm so good. Good to see you. How are you? Amen. Noel, good to see you. Welcome. I was abused as a young girl. I was beaten by my mother. I was verbally abused by my mother. I was sexually abused by another man. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was a rageaholic. I've driven drunk. I've sold drugs. I was a juvenile delinquent. Probably my story is similar to most of your stories in here. I'm white and I'm female and nothing happened to me. So, I got a get out of jail free card. And so I'm here now because I see myself in every one of you.
I'm a traumatized child, raised by a traumatized child. My mother was traumatized as well as her parents.
Like he said, we wasn't born in the world of being evil people. My mother didn't want me. She hid her pregnancy. And she tried to flush me down the toilet. But as I learned about these things, I always asked myself what was wrong with me.
When I come to the circle and I see everybody else and she's reading off the questions and people stepping in further, and I look at my childhood and I'm like, a lot of these people in this yard are just like me.
There was one step I should have taken that I didn't take, and I saw some of my brothers and my friends take that step, and I felt like such a coward. I wasn't brave enough to be there with them when they took that step. And every round after that, I took the most difficult step.
Our traumas kept us separated. We were all on the circumference, all standing apart. But once we began to acknowledge our traumas publicly, it brought us all closer together.
In prison, you're not supposed to show your weaknesses in prison, no. But to want to do that, to walk in that circle like that, and to take each step forward was a reminder to ourselves that we still have a humanity and we worthy to be loved, though. Most people on the outside don't understand that we want to change so we can re-enter society better than what we left it.
And I think one of the things that when you was yelling at no shame and you had us yelling it out, it was freeing us too. And it was a point to where when I was looking at that and we was all looking at it in a circle, you can hear that echo, no shame. And that was very powerful, especially coming from a little lady like you.
I'm 76 years old. I've seen a lot. I don't like talking. I like to meet people that understand what's happening without words, and you one of them. Today has been one of the best days I had in my whole entire life since I've been out of these 40 years.
Okay. There we go. You know, the beginning of our conversation so far has been heavy. There's been a certain weight to it. But this, the work that our professors are doing up in Muskegon is life-giving. It's lightening. It's the best teaching experience of their professional careers. Who's coming to Fred Johnson's talk? Is it next week, Jim? This week, Wednesday. Ask him. Ask him if it's the best teaching experience of his career. Just see what he says. Fred Johnson, he'll tell you. There's a good news at the end of this story. It's not all heaviness. But if you don't start with the heaviness, if you don't start with the context, if you don't understand sort of why we're there and what we're hoping to accomplish, it can seem a little, it's hard to hold the pieces together. We think that a Christian liberal arts education is good for people. People, not just 18 to 22-year-old young adults from the suburbs. People. And these guys are people, fundamentally. Remember where I started? We see these people, we start with them with the assumption that they're beloved children of God made in his image and likeness. And if you start there, if you treat these people as human beings, eventually they start acting like human beings in ways that are both surprising and beautiful. Every once in a while we get let down. I don't want to paint a Pollyannish perfect world here. It isn't. But you'd be surprised at what these guys are capable of. It's amazing. It's amazing. Let me it was what's your name, sir, in the AV in the back? Thank you, David. David wanted me to share a little bit about how I got involved with prison education. I can promise you that it was not something that informed my career path. It's a very recent sort of vocational stirring of the Holy Spirit, if you want to call it that. About, let's see, it was in 2018, I think, my colleague, Jared Ortiz from the religion department, approached me and said, "Hey, Rich, I've been teaching a religion class for Calvin College in a prison." I said, "Calvin College is teaching classes in prison?" He says, "Yeah, in Ionia at Handlin Correctional Facility." I said, "Oh, that's interesting to know." He said, "Yeah, I'm teaching this class. It's really great. I love it. My students are very able people, good students. Great, good. How about those tigers, you know?" I was trying to change the subject because I was growing less comfortable with each sentence, each superlative he came forward with. I felt was being aimed closer and closer to a question he was going to ask me. And then finally he said, "I think that if Hope and Western Theological Seminary got together and partnered, we could do something like that similar, produce a similar program, maybe at another prison." So, interesting idea. Very cool. "What do you want from me?" He says, "Well, I think you should do it." And I said, "Well, I think you're wrong. You're at the very least wrong. You might be some other things too, besides wrong. But I'll just say you're my good friend and just say that you're, misinformed." I mean, I don't know anything about prison. Nothing. Everything I knew about prison, I learned watching movies on TV. Literally, that's all I knew. I didn't know anybody who'd ever been incarcerated. It just wasn't part of my world. Anyway, he's one of these people that doesn't take no for an answer all that easily. And about 6 weeks later, I asked him how his continuing search for somebody to spearhead this idea was going. As a mistake. I shouldn't have asked that question. He says, oh, really bad. Nobody wants to do this. He said, you should do it, Rich, you know? And I said, well, I don't think I should, but can I come to the prison and just observe your class? Just to see what we're talking about here, because this is such a foreign idea to me. He said, oh, maybe. And so he worked it out, the security clearance and all that. And so it was a day much like today. It was sort of late February, 2018. And I found myself in his car. And we're driving to Ionia. And I'm a little anxious about it all, to be honest with you. Not scared exactly, but just clenchy. If that helps you understand my state of mind. Clenchy. I said, hey, by the way, you know, what are you teaching today in this religion class of yours? He goes, the Christological controversies. I said, well, I don't know what those are. He slides the book over across the seat of the car, and I look at it. It's the early church, the early councils, the development of doctrine and all that. I said, okay. I still don't know very much about it, but I know at least where we are sort of in the playing field. So we get into the prison, and we get to the front desk, and they take your name and ID and everything, and the gate opens, and the gate is noisy and clangy. I think they designed it to be clangy. It has an effect on you. And you walk into what's called the bubble, and that's the area between two gates, and the gate closes behind you. And now you're in it, you know. Take your shoes off, take your socks off, submit to this, pat down, pretty thorough pat down. Open your mouth so we can look inside. I passed all those tests. The other gate opens, and we walk out into the prison yard, and this is where I had my first surprise. If you go like this and you don't look at the razor wire here, the guard towers, or any of that, you think, well, this could be a small college in wintertime. You can see where there's some flower beds that are going to bloom in the spring, and there's sidewalks and a couple of trees, and there's buildings around the edge. You think, I'm finding myself surprised a little bit by my environment. So we walked for 5 minutes across the yard into the school building. I didn't know prisons had school buildings, but they do. You walk into the school building. Remember when you were a kid? You walked into your elementary school and there was a smell to it. Remember the smell? You cannot walk into any building that has that smell and not be transported back to school days. That's the smell it had. The floors were polished. It looked like a school. I was escorted into the classroom. Looked like a classroom. Wasn't as nicely appointed as this one, but it was desks, chalkboards, a lectern. It's a classroom. And I sat in the very far corner where the walls came together. My right shoulder touched one wall and my left shoulder touched the other wall. And if I could have merged into the cinder block, I would have. 8 o'clock, the students started to come in. And they're all wearing the state-issued orange and blue clothing, looking ragged, ragged. The clothes have to fall off you before they'll give you a new set. A lot of them didn't have shoelaces in their state-issued black shoes. And of course, I'm a oddball in the class, and they didn't expect to see me, and so I got a lot of hard looks. That made me a little nervous too. But then a couple of guys came over and shook my hand. What's your name? Why are you here? They had a lot of questions. Well, I'm from Hope College, and I'm just observing your class. I've been wanting to learn more about this. You're from Hope College. That's Calvin's big rivalry, right? That's right. I said, I notice you're wearing my colors right now. So we developed a little bit of thing, the Hope Calvin thing happened. That was fun. And then at 8:03, this happened. And I know it was 8:03 because I've trained myself over the years that when something I think is a big thing is happening, I look at a clock because it helps me remember where I was, what time it was, and what was happening. At 8:03, a student raised his hand. And Professor Ortiz called on him, and the man stood up to ask his question. Anybody in here spend your life as a teacher? You did? Did your students rise to ask their questions? Yeah, that's right. They just sat there glumly and hoped that they were invisible and adequately invisible. This man rises to ask his question. He said, "Professor, I wonder if you could help me understand what Irenaeus is trying to say on page 78 of our book, because it seems to stand in stark contrast to what Origen says in the footnote on page 152. And I'm thinking to myself, what? Where am I? What's happening? My students, who I love and have loved and will love without reservation, don't ask questions that way. Guys in the prison do, the guys on campus don't. And before the professor could answer the question, 4 hands shot up. He calls on one of them. What's the guy do? Stands to face his peer. He says this is almost a direct quote. "If my colleague would read with greater care and attention, he would see that on page 86, Irenaeus goes on to explain himself in more complete detail, such that these are tough guys who've been in prison for their whole lives, some of them, such that his thesis comports perfectly with what Origen says in the footnote on page 152. And everybody in the 40-person class nods their head. And I'm thinking, I don't know what's happening here, but I need to learn more about it. So I went back several more times to observe more classes, and one thing led to another, and now we're in about our 4th year of teaching college courses to incarcerated men at Muskegon Correctional Facility. And every time we go to the prison, every time, which is to say there are no times when we go to the prison where this doesn't happen. Every time something like that takes place. Something like that surprises us. We come back with story or write them down. I write down what happened. And we've got a million of these things. These guys are very, very surprising. Okay, what are we trying to accomplish? The first thing I want to point to is that we are not some kind of nice, warm and fuzzy community outreach of the college or the seminary. This is an extension of the college and seminary's educational missions. This is college in prison. These are a different kind of student, different sort of category of student, living in a different physical location, taking the same college program that students here in Holland take. It's not a nice service to the community. It's not a way to, help West Michigan be a better place. Hopefully it's doing all that, but its fundamental nature is an educational program of the college for enrolled degree-seeking students. That is it sounds maybe simple as I say the words to you right now, but it's a very challenging thing to get people to buy into. It's not that they're opposed to that idea. It's just that they Like if I run into 10 people today and they all ask me about this program, 9 of them will ask this question. How's the prison ministry coming? That's how they'll phrase it, because that's their, that's how they can contextualize. When they see, do-gooders going to prison to talk to incarcerated people, that's sort of the box they're able to put it in. It's a good box to be in. We need more people in that box. But this is different. This is an educational program. This is going to college, even though you're incarcerated. We want to, first of all, as a sort of first order bit of work, help these men become transformed people. Now, transformation is a word that is too often used. Whenever you hear the word transformation, you should like get your skeptical look on. You should really make them prove it, because everybody claims that this program transforms or this does. Transformation is used way too often on our campus. You know who's really transformed by a Hope College education? These guys. These guys. These guys are. The 18-year-old kid from Jenison, who's got a mom and a dad at home and a couple brothers and sisters and, a little money in the bank and has some social support. College is important for that young person. I'm not trying to knock the legs out from that idea at all, but transformed, they're going to be fine. These guys absolutely need this. These guys are like a person out in the desert who hasn't had any water to drink, and we're giving them some water to drink. You're just a different person after that. These people are transformed. So the students, the individual students, are our first order of concern, but they're not the only people or things we're concerned about. There's pretty good evidence that when you educate even a small fraction of the population of a prison, and Muskegon Correctional Facility has 1,200 men in it. Our program at its largest is going to be about 80 students. But there's evidence that when you educate a small fraction of the men, that there's a kind of, it's like dropping a pebble into a pond, there's a ripple effect. Violence goes down in the prison. The prison never becomes good. Don't hear me say that. All the adjectives that you used at the beginning of our class to describe prisons in fairly dark and dreary terms probably still apply, but it's less bad. There's less violence, and consequently, it's good for everybody. Educating you turns out to be good for you, even though you're not in her program. Another circle of concern is the corrections staff. So I don't know if anybody knows anybody who does corrections work, but those people live in what's called a high threat environment. Because prisons are dangerous, and because corrections officers live and work in sort of fear that they could be physically injured, they're kind of clenched all the time. Maybe that's why they tend to live on average 12 years less than most other people. Maybe that's why their average lifespan after they retire is 18 months. Maybe that's why their rate of diagnosed serious mental health and suicide is 3 times higher than the average of all the other uniformed services, military, police, firefighter, etc. Being a corrections officer is life-sapping work. And these people are employees of the state of Michigan working to protect us and to keep us healthy and safe. So we owe them something. They work for us. And if we can provide them with a better environment to work in because they're not feeling under such threat, that's a nice spin-off of this. They're not our first concern. They're not even our second concern, but they can have better lives if we can start educating some students. Now, when you educate a person who's incarcerated, any kind of education, GED education, technical or trade education, college education, the recidivism rate goes down by about 45% from 85%. That's a huge drop. If you provide an incarcerated person with a college education, a bachelor's degree, the recidivism rate goes down to 5%. If you provide a master's degree, it goes to 0. They just don't come back. The reason they don't come back is because they're different people. After they've been educated, they're transformed. It's not that life is going to be, super easy for them. It's just they can think now, they've got a way of processing their lives and they have meaning and purpose and connection that goes beyond the gang or, sort of their previous criminal lives. I want to say one more thing about it's not exactly the major purpose, but it's a kind of nice offshoot. So we live in very politicized times, don't we? I mean, I don't know if I took a poll in here, some of you are probably like MSNBC people, and some of you might be Fox News people. I'm picking things on the extreme here. But that's the kind of thing we're dealing with these days. You're a red state or a blue state, or you're conservative, or you're a liberal, this or you're that. Everybody's trying to force us all into various camps and positions and keep us there and stereotype. We tend to stereotype others. One of the things that's really interesting about this program is it really tends to bring together everybody. Everybody from all those various descriptors I just threw out tends to have something that they really like about this. Like if you could take a look at a list of our donors, you knew everybody and they were all, let's say they were all your next door neighbor. You go down the list, you say, oh my gosh, she's the most liberal person I know. She marches in Washington, D.C. every single weekend just for fun. And then, you'd go down the list a little bit further and you look to your left, and you say, oh my gosh, Ann is the most conservative person I know. I mean, she just thinks that America is terrible, and we just need to throw everything out right now. And they're both on our list. That's my point. There's something about this that brings folks from the edges to the middle. I don't know why exactly, but there must be enough good. I think people can either see a sort of gospel imperative here, a kind of social justice imperative, or just a good public policy imperative. And it captures 99% of everybody, which is great. Okay, so what are we doing? Let's just sort of summarize it. It's a 4-year Hope College bachelor's degree. And the major that we created for these men is called Faith, Leadership, and Service. And so there's 3 elements there. And those 3 elements map onto our sort of broader goals for our students. First of all, we want them to be personally transformed. That's the faith element. And by the way, you do not have to, there's no like religious litmus test to be admitted to our program. We'll take anybody who meets certain criteria, and religious commitment isn't one of them. So we have lots of guys in our program who are kind of committed Christians, but we've got a couple of Nation of Islam guys. We've got a Buddhist or two. We've got a bunch of people who aren't quite sure what they are. Little slice of America in there. It's fine. We tell them we're going to teach from a sort of Christian worldview. We don't apologize for that, and that's what sort of frames our program. And if they want that, great, come on, we'd be happy to have you. And they do. But we imagine sort of sending them out after they graduate with their bachelor's degrees to be of service in their community. And because of who we recruit to the program, for many of them, their community are going to be other people inside the prison, either the prison they're part of or some other prison in the state of Michigan. So they're going to work as chaplain's assistants or academic tutors or drug and alcohol program leaders.
Are you saying that they are they stay in the system as a prison?
Well, a lot of them will be, Pam, because we are recruiting people who have long or indeterminate sentences, including life sentences. About half of our students have life sentences. And you're thinking to yourself, well, you may be thinking to yourself, well, that's kind of a counterintuitive idea, right? Why don't we provide a college education to people who are going to get out of prison so they can go back then and be sort of productive members of their community? Well, we can't transform the prison with people that are going to get out of it. We have to have people that are actually going to be there to serve as models for others. And so if our only focus really was just on the individual student, it would make more sense to take people with 5 years left on their sentence, give them a college education, push them out the door, get them a job, and so forth. And some of our guys will fall into that category. Some of them will. But we have bigger, broader goals for the program. And so the guys who are going to be serving life sentences, or what I call basketball score sentences, that's most of our students, will go and find ways to be of service to their fellow incarcerated men inside the prison community. And there's lots and lots and lots of work for them to do that. We have, so Calvin's been doing their program for a few years longer than we have. So they actually have some graduating classes. So we received from the Hanlon Correctional Facility at the beginning of the school year, 4 of Calvin's graduates, and they're serving as our tutors. And so they've been to college and they're good, they're smart guys and they're excellent supports for our program. That's the way that they can be of service to their fellow man and putting their college degree to good work. And that's kind of what we have in mind for our students too. I used to think of them as missionaries. We're going to send you out like missionaries, but I've stopped doing that. Most missionaries, anybody ever been a missionary? Know a missionary? Missionaries. Most of them go out, but then they do plan to kind of come back, right? Yeah, that's what most missionaries do. I'm starting to think of our students, Pat, as Irish pilgrims. Now, the Irish pilgrims were like the toughest pilgrims ever in medieval times. Because even pilgrims in those days, they would start on their pilgrimage, but they would, they'd want to come back home, right? Not the Irish. The Irish were so aflame with the Holy Spirit that they would go down to the water's edge, build their boats, get into them, throw the oars and the rudder and the sails back onto the beach, push off into the surf and say, Lord, blow us to where we're supposed to go, and never come back again. And that's what our students are going to do when they graduate. Some of them, probably not all of them, but a lot of them. They can be like Irish pilgrims being blown by the Holy Spirit to where they're needed the most. I think it's a beautiful vision.
So could I just ask a question? When they get their baccalaureate degree,
Yeah.
what if I come out in the world and I say, I'd like to be a school teacher?
Yeah.
So then would they have to go additional education? Obviously, they have to do student teaching. So
Yeah.
that has to be when they're out of prison.
That's right.
So this is a prep thing and they
Yeah.
have additional courses and they could have it sounds like some of them could be great teachers from how they respond.
It
in
might be,
class.
and we
Yeah.
probably will actually end up teaching a couple of classes as part of our program that are in the educational realm. How do you, whether you're going to be in prison or whether you're going to get out later, how do you teach somebody to do anything? So we're probably going to help them with that. If they need specialized credentials for work to do outside of prison, some sort of license or certification, the first thing they're going to have to decide is whether the state that issues the license or the certification will allow people with a criminal record to be part of that profession. And most of them won't. Most of them won't. Our thinking is that a liberal arts education prepares them very broadly to reform their thinking and to be the kind of flexible, nimble people that the workforce needs to do a lot of jobs. So that's our thinking. The program is built to have 4 cohorts of 20 students each. Our first, we have 2 cohorts in the program right now. They're both a little smaller. They're only 12 students, and that was a COVID thing. But we've been assured by the Michigan Department of Corrections that we'll be able to recruit 20 students for our 3rd cohort, and we're in the process of that right now. And we look forward to welcoming them around the 4th of July and starting their program. The seminary and the college professors are engaged in teaching in the program. We do have the occasional adjunct from another institution. We have a great math teacher right now. His name is David Austin. And Professor Austin is a sort of national award-winning mathematics teacher from Grand Valley. And our guys were very nervous to take math. I was talking to him, you know, in the months leading up to this class. I said, yeah, you guys got your first math class coming. And you know, Dr. Ray, last time we took math was junior high school, and it was not a mountaintop experience for us. Well, David Austin comes in there on the first day, and we always accompany our professors on the very first day they go into the prison. And so I bring them in, I introduce them to the guys, and I turn them loose, and I go and sit in the back of the class. And I think he's going to get the syllabus out in the textbook and say, okay, now turn to page 5 and let's read this together. And here's the syllabus. Here's what we're going to do. You know, the schedule of weeks, and you're going to have exams 3 times in the class and a paper or something like that. He doesn't say any of that. He says, oh, it's good to be here. It's nice to meet you. And I just have this worksheet. I'm just going to pass this out. It's got a game on it. Why don't you find a partner up 2 by 2, and play this game on this worksheet. And let's see what happens. And these guys are looking around thinking they were going to a math class. So he does this for about 2 or 3 weeks. He doesn't use the word math for 2 or 3 weeks. And then he informs them that they'd been doing calculus. Now they love math. I was at a study hall this morning, and there's some cohort 2 guys up, and they're just working at the board, holding like a little mini impromptu tutorial. Nobody assigned them to do any of that. And there's 5 or 6 guys sitting around, and they're throwing answers, you know, and they don't have to do any of this. That's the effect he's having. He's rehumanizing them through mathematics. The name of their textbook, Mathematics for the Common Good. We have some WTS students going into the prison. I'm sorry, they used to go into the prison as teaching assistants, pardon me. And the prison system won't let us bring them in anymore. I think we'll get back to the point where we can, but they're slowing us down in a couple of instances. So they work with the students' papers, they work with the professors back here on campus. So they're very involved in our program. And then we're planning a certificate of restorative justice through the seminary that will involve WTS students coming to the prison to take classes alongside the incarcerated guys, learning from each other. So that's a big project that's in the works. Here's a picture of our students. You can tell that they look happy and they look engaged, and it is because they are happy and they are engaged. And they're really, really hardworking guys. They average about 47 years of age. Adult learners, there's some things that, you know, if you ever get into the teaching business, adult learners, it's not a bad place to be. They engage things a little differently than 18 to 22-year-olds. These guys are very, very serious. I have a student, one of these guys, where is he? He's in the back row. I taught a first-year seminar. It was his first college class. And he's a good student, a little verbal, but a good student. And he got an 86. His final average in the class was an 86. He got a B+. And he didn't like it. So he said, "How did I lose 14 points in your class? Tell me why. Explain to me exactly what happened." So I did. He still didn't like it. I said, "Hey, Damon, I got a question to ask you. When we started our class, first day, how many points had you earned?" He thought about it. He said, "None." And I said, "By the time we were done, you had earned 86 of them. Right?" "Right." I said, "That's pretty good. Congratulations." Trying to turn this guy's mindset from a deficit mindset to an asset informed mindset. There's a lot of thinking, a lot of reversal of thinking to be able to do with this population. When we were in the planning stage for this program, we asked ourselves, should we teach in a women's prison? And we gave it serious consideration and looked carefully at what the implications would be. It turns out there's only one prison for women in the state of Michigan. It's in Ypsilanti, over near Ann Arbor. So it's 2.5, 3 hours away. It's a pretty crazy prison. It's overpopulated by about a factor of 2. Has 4 security levels, which makes it a very complex kind of prison. And there are a couple of other colleges and universities that are teaching in that particular prison, Huron Valley Correctional Facility for Women. So we decided that we would not place our program in the women's facility. But I'm always asked this question: why do you only serve, male incarcerated guys? And this is why. So I'm just letting you know. So we started off by teaching 6 non-credit courses. We sort of knew that we've never done this in a prison before. We know how to teach on a college campus with traditional students, but we didn't know what we didn't know. And so we started off teaching non-credit courses in a pilot phase, and that really helped us learn a lot. We learned an awful lot by doing that. During COVID, we were really slowed down. I'm about to say that this is an exaggeration, but honestly, I don't really think it is. Every prisoner got COVID during COVID. Every single one of them got it at least once. And it was a very, very, very difficult time for them. It wasn't so easy for us either. We couldn't come into the prison during the sort of most intense period of the COVID pandemic. But we didn't want our students to lose the momentum, and how can we keep them engaged and so forth? So we sent a couple of book studies in, gave them questions to answer, gather together in groups and discuss these books. When you're done with this one, write this paper, and then we'll send a new book in. We didn't know how long this thing would take. Anyway, we had a couple of these book studies that happened. We have an agreement with the Michigan Department of Corrections between the college and the seminary that's been signed. It's kind of a contract to do this. The program has been accredited by the college's accreditor, the Higher Learning Commission. We filled out 1 million forms, and they came and actually made a visit here on the campus. They went up to the prison, went into the prison, And we have been found in good standing there. So now the college officially exists in Holland, Michigan, as it has since 1866, and now in Muskegon, at Muskegon Correctional Facility. You go to the Higher Learning Commission's website, type in Hope College, hit the button, it'll show 2 locations, which is kind of cool. We've launched our bachelor's degree. We've created a living learning community by moving all of our students into the same living unit. So they can study together and they could live together. And that's a very, very helpful thing to do. We have a kind of peer group formation program. We call it homeroom. You guys all went to school, you had homeroom, right? The reason we called it homeroom was because we didn't think the warden would ask us any questions when we said we want to have a weekly homeroom, because the warden went to school too. He sort of has an idea of what homeroom is all about. Our homeroom is way different. In our homeroom, we put together groups of 4 or 5 guys with a trained peer facilitator, and they do some deep processing of their lives. Some deep processing of how their education is impacting them that week, you know. They do like their life storyboard, which is very, very, remember that video we saw? It's very that, okay? So we care more about just their intellectual development. We want them to develop as whole people, just like we do the students here on the main campus here in Holland. We feel a commitment to them that goes beyond just the sort of filling of their mind with information and facts. And this is one of the ways we're doing it.
The peer group people, are they on staff with Hope, or are they prison people? They sound like they should be psychiatrists or psychologists.
You know, that's a good question, Pat. Thanks for asking it. So Pam Bush is a professor at Western Seminary, and she is our associate director for learning and formation. So she directs this whole thing. And we have another young woman named Amy Piesker, who's our operations coordinator. And Amy goes in with Pam for these homerooms every week, every Friday. Amy's got a social work degree from Calvin College. And then they are training our tutors and some of our cohort 1 guys to be peer group leaders. They're equipping them with the skills that are necessary to be effective peer group leaders. It's a beautiful model. It's really working quite well. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And I thought of it when you talked about during COVID and the book studies. Where did their literacy level start to gather that? It seems as though that was one of the problems probably that got them to prison is illiteracy. So
Yeah. It's a good question. In order to get into our program, they have to have at least a GED or a high school diploma. So we're not taking people who are starting from, let's say, a 3rd grade reading level. I think that's probably the most fundamental way to answer your questions. But let me tell you one other story, because it's really interesting. Remember I told you I never go to the prison and there's not a story? The very first class we taught in our pilot phase of our program was a class called What Are People For? What are people for? Now we could have a pretty interesting conversation about that question right in this group, right? So the very first book that the professor assigned was Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. You know, I went over the syllabus with this professor and I saw this on the thing. I said, "You're doing this in week 1? You haven't even met these guys. Week 1, doesn't this feel like a huge risk?" He said, "Yes. And if it doesn't work, I'll make adjustments." And I said, "Okay, that's fair enough." So we get the books and we're in there for the first week. He says, "Okay, for next week, I want you to have read this book. Not chapters 1 through 7 or something, this book. And then we'll talk about it when I come back in a week." So I walked out of the prison. I said, "I'm going to buy you a steak dinner if they have read this book in a week." Okay. We come back the next week and he says, okay, I'm gonna put you into groups now. And I've got these questions on these pieces of paper. I want you to discuss these questions that are based on your reading. But before I break you up, does anybody have any just comments about this book? Impressions. What do we think about Aristotle? A hand goes up. I thought, maybe this went better than I thought. A guy named Sean stands up. He says, yeah, I have some questions or some observations to make. He said, the first time I read this, I didn't understand any of it. Nothing. I read it again. He said it was still just very difficult to understand, like reading a different language, maybe, you know? So I read it the third time, and I started to see little bits of it, you know, sort of come to light. I remembered reading those little bits before, and now they were making a little bit more sense to me. And now that I've read it a fourth time, I'm able to follow Aristotle's themes and his ideas much, much more easily. And I looked around the class, and 20 other guys were nodding their head like they all read it 4 times in a week too. These guys are capable of deep learning and profound thought, generative thinking, and a lot of creativity. Now, sometimes they really have to work to, you know, we're not giving them easy stuff to read. I mean, they've read Dante, they've read the Bible, they've read Aristotle, they're reading Plato and Homer right now. You know, Flannery O'Connor, MLK, they've read, you know, some stuff that's got a lot of deep meaning to it, and they always take away something that's very, very profound, and they can apply it to their lives, which I think is just beautiful. So you can see what the sort of numbers look like, you know, kind of by the numbers thing. At this point, our students have taken a total of 610 credit hours. They've got a composite GPA of 3.63. In last semester, 70% of them were on the dean's list, which is a 3.5 or better. And our persistence rate is 96%. We only lost one student, and that student, we lost him because he got out of prison. And he moved up to Traverse City with his family. So I can't complain about that. I'm happy for him. So here's a student story. This dwelling in the word, let's see if this works, yeah. This dwelling in the word is how we open up each of our homeroom peer group periods. It's a kind of group reflection on a particular scriptural passage. So this was a student facilitator of a peer group, and he said facilitating the group was inspiring. To be able to lead a group into dwelling in the word and to establish which questions are going to be expounded upon was encouraging. What I learned about myself was that I can lead a group instead of always being in the background. Leadership is something that everyone should experience. We may have doubts, but at the same time, a bird must be pushed out of the mother's nest. I love this. You know, this is somebody that's realizing something about himself for the first time, and then putting it to use in a productive way that serves other people. That's what a college education can do for an incarcerated person. Here's another student's story, and this was a kind of reflection on a student's small group conversation during a study hall. And we have maybe 3 or 4 of these study halls every week. He said, not by design, but the room was abuzz with receiving the new book and the student guidebook and returned assignments about Mr. Ives' Christmas and the warmth of other suns. Those were books that we sent in for these book studies during COVID time. Each of us acknowledged a profound level of gratitude with the academic opportunity with HWPEP and detailed how this relates to our personal lives. I mean, I just find encouragement in that. It just hits me in just the right place. And I never thought I would. You know, let's just be clear. 2017 wasn't that long ago. I never imagined this. What a gift for me. You know, it just is. Okay, so we're recruiting our third cohort. We're seeking federal Pell Grant funding. Incarcerated students used to be able to get federal Pell Grants, which is a federal form of financial aid for low-income students. In the crime bill of 1996, I think, they were redlined out of eligibility. And the number of college and prison programs at that time dropped from about 300 down to 8. Okay, Pell is coming back starting July 1. There's a big, long, convoluted government bureaucracy that we have to navigate to qualify for it. And we're working on it right now. And so our program is paid for by donations. We raise money. And I'm hoping that you'll be willing to at least stay in touch with us by receiving occasional communications from us and staying in touch with what's happening with our students and with our program. And that you might even think about whether this, fits into your own personal giving program. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pass this piece of paper around. And if you're willing, just put your name and email address down so that we can stay in touch with you about what's going on. Some of you may already be receiving the newsletter. I don't know. Pat, I think you are, aren't you? Yeah. Okay.
What are this Hope Gift or Western, do they support this financially?
Not with their budget. Yeah, the question was, is the college or the seminary supporting the program financially? The answer is no, not directly. We don't think it's necessarily good practice to support the education of these men with the tuition dollars of our traditional students. So we built kind of a firewall there. And so every dollar we spend in the prison is a dollar that we raise from a generous contributor. And people have been very generous up until now. Yeah. So sign up for the newsletter. If you're on, social media, promote our program. I know some of you are on social media because I see you there. Promote our program. Tell your friends and family. We love to talk with churches. And so if you are a parishioner someplace and we haven't made a presentation to your church, talk to your pastor or your adult education coordinator and get us invited. We'd love to come and talk with you, and then pray for our students too, because my gosh, they live hard lives, very hard lives, very, very, very hard lives. The guy I told you about who got released from prison, he's the only one we've lost from our program so far. He found out in November, on the very same day, that he was going to be released from prison after being there for 37 years, and that his mother died. He's on the phone, into the hospital room with his extended family as his mother lay dying. And he's also processing this idea that he's going to get out of prison, someplace he's been since he was 16 years old. And he just couldn't hold the idea in his head that he could finish the semester. If he would have gone 6 more weeks, he would have had a semester of college under his belt, could have used that to transfer and apply to some program when he was on the outside, but he couldn't do it. And he's a good guy, a very likely, any one of you would be very pleased to be his neighbor. You really would be. But his life circumstances just welled up in such a way that he just couldn't do it anymore, no matter how hard I tried to talk him out of it. So these guys live a tough existence, one that you and I can only barely imagine. And people come up to me now like I'm the big expert on prisons. I tell you, the more I go into the prison, the more I realize I don't know about prison. It's an Alice in Wonderland, up is down, down is up, left is right, right is left kind of environment. And, I'm very honest with our students when I say, listen, I only got this much. I can only see this much of what your lives are like, you know? So don't make any assumptions about what you think I know. Just tell me. And they do. These are 3 paintings done by one of our students named Alvin Smith. Alvin is a talented artist. And at the conclusion of each class, he paints an oil painting that reflects his experience in the class. And 3 of these paintings are now in the collection here at the college, at the Kreisinger Art Museum. And from right to left, you can, this is the painting he did as a reflection on his mathematics class. You can see his textbooks here, the graph on his computer and so forth. This is a reflection he did called The Mighty Two Mites. It's a reflection on his New Testament class. You can see the, you know, the sort of elderly, poor woman. She's got patched dress, varicose veins, and she's putting 2 of her coins from her empty coin purse into the red bucket. And the people behind her are wealthy, and they're getting ready to contribute from their, you know, their excess, and she's contributing, you know, from her need. And you can see in the reflection in the puddle that her reflection back is of a young, beautiful, richly adorned woman pouring out a heap of gold coins from a lavish vessel, the Mighty Two Mites. And then this one here, this is from Fred, this is a reflection on Fred Johnson's class. Ask him about it on Wednesday. His class was Civil War America. Civil War America taught to a group of African-American students, by and large, who really didn't know their own history. And what you have is a kind of African tribesman here looking this way at the slave and the Civil War soldier and the incarcerated person and the college graduate. It's beautiful. It's the most powerful thing I know to say about what a college education can do for these people. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple questions. I want to say them both, or I'll forget one.
Okay, sure.
The non-credit courses, what are they and how are they accepted and so forth? And the other one is family incorporated at all into their education?
The pilot course, which courses we taught in the pilot phase were non-credit courses. They're on their transcript, but they don't bear any academic credit, and they're not going to count towards their degree. And the reason you have to understand that we did not yet have permission to offer a bachelor's degree when we started teaching those courses. The college had a series of interim presidents, and the seminary was looking for a new president. We didn't have leaders in place that were going to take a chance on something like this. So we say, will you give us permission to go in for 6 months and teach a non-credit course? They said yes. And then 6 months later, we came back to them and say, can we renew for 6 more months? And they said yes. Then we came back to them 6 months later and say, can we go 6 more months and teach some more courses? And they said yes. And then the last time we came back, we said, will you please sign this MOU so we can launch our degree program? And they said yes. Mostly humanities stuff. So there was that What Are People For course. There's a philosophy course called What is the Good Life? There was a nonviolent communication course that was taught. What else was taught? Oh, there was a course called Friendship and Community. I'm misplacing the last one, the title of the last class. Yeah. Good. Oh, family. We're not allowed to have any connection with their family. In fact, there are a lot of prison rules, the sum of which add up to the only communication we're really allowed to have is with our students. And so, occasionally we get letters or we get emails from other people and we don't answer them. We stick our communication just with our students because we don't want to get in trouble. And there's a million ways to get in trouble. Right, right. Mhm. Those are great questions.
Did you feel safe
Yeah.
most of the time?
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah. Yeah, I did feel safe. And we've had female professors come in too. I want to say that. And we've had female graduate students come in. And I think they have felt safe too. You know, the students in our program are very, very dedicated to making sure that the program is successful. And they all walk around in fear of failure. They do. But it's not a fear of personal failure so much as it is letting the whole group down. You know, we remind them all the time, we say, your education is not merely for your own benefit. And they have really bought into that, bought into the idea that they're a learning community and that you're responsible for your learning and that you're responsible for his learning and he's responsible for her learning. And that's one of the things that helps build a kind of community of safety and security. Yeah.
How many classes do you teach and what do you teach up there?
I've only taught one class in the 4 years we've been doing this. It was a first-year seminar called Integrating Faith, Leadership, and Service. So it's the first class that our second cohort taught. And I wanted to give them sort of a bookend to what this major was about and the kind of subjects that they'd be learning. And so that was the title of my first-year seminar. At Hope College, the first-year seminar professor serves as the student's academic advisor. So I'm the advisor to all these guys too. And so I had 3 or 4 advising appointments today. I say, step into my office, which is 2 folding chairs in the hallway. And we do the same kind of academic advising that we would do with students here on the main campus. I say, I want to talk to you today in 3 areas: academic concerns, social concerns, and spiritual concerns. And you can talk to me about whichever of those you want to, and as much as you want to. So I'm their advisor. Let's see, what else can I say? So we try to identify the most able and most outstanding professors that we can on both campuses.
Are there classes every day?
There will be classes every day, but there aren't yet. I think probably starting in the fall, we'll have classes, multiple classes actually every day. Right now, we've got about 5 classes happening in any given week. And starting in the fall, that will increase to 11, I think. And I think it'll top out at 12 or 13. Yeah.
Thank you. How are professors and instructors selected to be part of the program?
Well, that's a good question. We get together and we say, okay, we need to teach a psychology class in the fall. Who's the best psychology professor at the college? We say this to ourselves. We don't say it to anybody else. We say it to ourselves. We say, okay, what would be a big win for our students? This woman would be a huge win for them. This guy over here, he'd be great as well. This person, listen, terrific psychologist, but this is an environment where we don't think this person's going to do that well for a variety of reasons. So let's approach those other 2 people first and see what happens. We needed a math professor. Went to our math department and they were just slammed. They were just in a season where they had some people with some health problems and couple sabbaticals, and they had a hard time filling all their sections, on campus. And so I said, well, I know the chair of the math department at Grand Valley. Let me go talk to him. Had a meeting with him and he sent me David Austin. So the Holy Spirit works in profoundly mysterious ways. So that's how we do it. Yeah.
And what kind of accommodations are made for those professors in terms of their workload on campus?
So far, no accommodations. Now, I don't know how sustainable that's going to be over time. But right now, if you're going to teach in the program, you're going to do it over and above your regular campus assignment. So the other thing that we have is motivated people. We've got professors who really are willing to give in, rather significant ways of their time. Now, we pay them, okay? We pay their mileage too, so we're not asking them to volunteer, but they're going above and beyond to be able to do this. And most of them will say it's the best teaching experience they've had.
So when you say we pay them, it's out of those donations.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask a question that's maybe a little controversial.
Sure.
You've said that Hope College does not provide any funding.
no.
Hope College does not provide any person power.
They're providing me with some release time from teaching to be able to organize things. Western Seminary is providing Professor David Stubbs with some release time. So all in all, between the two institutions, we've got about 1.5, 1.6 FTEs of kind of in-kind personnel to be able to organize all of this.
So does Hope cover the costs for those positions?
Yes,
Okay.
Hope
So
and the seminary.
Under that auspice,
Yeah.
then it's identified as a Hope
Yes.
program.
Mhm. Yep.
Thank you.
Yes.
How can a student apply to this program?
Good question. We sent out about 2 weeks ago a kind of prison system-wide notice. Letting incarcerated people all over the state know that this was now available, that we're starting the application process. So their next step then is they have to indicate an interest to their particular prison's school principal. School principal will take their name, and then the school principal will go in and figure out if they're eligible. Do they have a GED? Do they have a high school diploma? Do they have a record in prison, which is admirable, or have they got a bunch of violations? Are they a level 2 security prisoner? That's the only kind we can take. Do they have at least 7 years left on their sentence? If they fit into that category, okay, they make the list. Now their next step is they have to go get a recommendation from someone in authority at their prison. It could be a chaplain, could be a warden, could be a unit counselor, something like that. And if they get that, then they can apply. The application is a simple 1-page form plus 3 essays of an hour. They're proctored. And these essays help us understand their motivation for wanting to go to college and their writing ability, which is to say their thinking ability. We learn a lot from these essays. And then we get them all the stuff compiled. We have a big committee. We take a look at it and we take the 20 best people. And if they're already in Muskegon, great. If they're not, they get transferred to Muskegon. They have a hold put on their file, so they can't be transferred out until they finish their degree program. That's how it works. Yeah. Mhm.
While we're taking these classes, do they have other functions in the prison, any jobs, or I have no idea how.
Yeah. Going to school, going to college is their prison job. Now, lots of incarcerated people have a prison job. And they pay terrible. I mean, they don't make any money at all, none. But we negotiated with the Michigan Department of Corrections that they would actually pay these guys a very small sum of money to actually be college students. So instead of working in the cafeteria or working in the garden or working in the, as a custodian or something like that, they're going to college instead. Yeah.
Well, any more questions or? Dr. Ray, this has just been wonderful.
Thank you very
Thank you
much for
so
your
much
kind
for your
attention.
description of entering, and thank you for your work and for Hope College and the Western Seminary. It certainly is looking at prison in a different light and what we can do for people. I mean, it's wonderful.
Great.
It's really, really good hearing all the